Hey everybody. So I want to talk about Tanner Cook. I had to write his name down because I keep saying like Tyler Cook or Travis Cook or something, Trevor Cook or something like that. I think my brain is just actively rejecting this person. It's like, no, we're not letting Tanner Cook in here. You can't. We're not gonna. You're already thinking too much about World War III and a whole lot of other problems. And the and just the realities of what's going on in the world. We're not letting this dumbass in here too, but it is what it is, and it needs to be spoken about because there's a lot of opinions about this, and it's something that we really need to address. So, broadly speaking, there is a new social cancer that is rapidly metastasizing, and it is people, usually, obviously, young adults, posting horrible, violent, antisocial behavior on the internet and calling them what they're doing internet pranks, that this is funny. Recently, we've seen things like the guys who go around committing home invasions, letting themselves into people's homes and acting like they live there, walking around videotaping themselves, walking around inside other people's homes. We've seen things like what's known as the bucket challenge, where kids will, I assume kids, I can't imagine anyone over about 25 doing something like this. But anyway, people going up, what they do with the bucket challenge is they put a bucket on somebody's head and run away. They go into like a department store where they can get a bucket, like a Walmart or a Home Depot or something, and they put a bucket on someone's head and run away before the person has time to take it off. And that was in the news recently because a woman, it triggered a heart condition that a woman had when somebody did this. These things are not funny. They're not cute. They are they are at best juvenile delinquency. At worst, they are acts of violent assault and other things like that, other such crimes. I don't have any sympathy for you if you do something like this and you end up getting the shit beaten out of you. I really don't, as much as I don't want to see violence be used at all in any circumstance. I certainly think that violent reaction from the person you're harassing is more than justified if you do something like this. Before I go any further, I'm gonna pause and ask that the people in the audience not raise the question with me about, well, gosh, Jordan, if you're opposed to people doing things like that, how could you not be on George Zimmerman's side? How could you, why are you on Trayvon Martin's side? Why are you on Ahmaud Arbery's side? Why are you on Jordan Neely's side? And because in all of those situations, those were not people who were directly bothering the people who killed them. In all of those situations, the people who killed them put themselves into a situation that did not directly concern them as vigilantes. They were not acting in self-defense. Anyway, so when we're talking about people who are committing violent assaults for the sake of getting internet famous, I mean, good Lord, no, I have no sympathy for you if you get your ass beat at that point. That's about the least of what you deserve. But anyway, a very specific example of this social contagion came to a head recently when Tanner Cook was shot by Alan Cooley. This happened back in a few months ago in April, I believe. It's been in the news recently because Alan Cooley was acquitted of all but one of the charges that he faced in shooting Tanner Cook. The jury agreed that he did, in fact, act reasonably in self-defense. They held him on one charge that had to do with discharging a firearm in a public place, I believe in an indoors public facility or something like that. Seems a little bizarre if you've agreed that he was correct to fire the firearm on all of the other counts, but you're still holding him on this one count. All these things are they're interrelated. He couldn't fire the firearm in self-defense unless he was firing it indoors. But that's a side point to what I really want to talk about. Anyway, Tanner Cook has already established himself as a public menace. He does it not, unlike, for example, someone like Jordan Neely, who is homeless and suffering severe mental illness and needing help before he gets himself into a bad situation. Tanner Cook is somebody who is willfully and intentionally being a social parasite, willfully and intentionally harassing people, and being a public menace. So, what happened? Alan Cooley was picking up delivery food to deliver. He worked for DoorDash, and he was at a shopping mall, in the food court of a shopping mall, picking up food to bring to somebody as part of his job. Tanner Cook, along with the person that was filming the encounter and a couple of other people, came up to Alan Cooley, took out a cell phone, put the cell phone in Alan Cooley's face, and had it start playing a message that said, "Hey, dumbass, stop thinking about my twinkle." While he did this, Tanner Cook had a very dead, kind of resting bitch face, menacing look on his face, and he walked away. Alan Cooley turned, walked away, told Tanner Cook multiple times, 3 times very clearly, to stop following him around. Tanner Cook refused, continued to put the phone in his face, and at that point he was shot by Alan Cooley, who was eventually found not guilty on grounds of self-defense. Tanner has, amazingly, a small cadre of people that are defending him, or even people that are trying to find some even-handed ground in all of this, or something like that. To all of those people, first and foremost, you need to understand something. I can say one, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but I can tell you one thing with utter certainty. I used to be a dispatch officer. Many, many years ago, for a couple of years, I was a dispatch officer for the police. So if you called for emergency services, I was one of the people who would set you up with police or fire or EMT, rescue, whatever you needed. And I was one of those people, and I learned a lot about police procedure and that kind of thing. And I actually used to know all of the police codes, the radio codes and everything, at least for my district. I've forgotten them now. But one of the things, if this incident, let's say rather, that Alan Cooley had not shot Tanner Cook, he had called the police, what I would have radioed out to the police officers was that there was a person, among other things, that there was a person using fighting words. And the reason I would say that, fighting words is a term that constitutes any language that can reasonably be construed as menacing or aggressive or belligerent. You can't, obviously, we're not allowed, the law is not allowed to say what phrases specifically constitute fighting words, because if they do that, that would be a First Amendment violation. That's censorship. But obviously context is key, but it is very, very reasonable to construe profanity as use of fighting words. If somebody is menacing another person with profanity, that can be construed as fighting words. Hey, dumbass would easily be reasonably construed as fighting words. Now, obviously, even in that situation, everyone involved is innocent until proven guilty, but that's how I would handle it, and reasonably so. So the fact that he's doing that, irrespective of what his intentions are, is exactly what it would already constitute a physical threat. Then there are legal boundaries for what constitute a physical threat, and they begin long before what most people would think constitutes a physical threat. And there's a reason for that, because what most people would think constitutes a physical threat is something that we need to stop long before it happens. So, for example, a lot of people are surprised to learn that if you just come up and put your hand on somebody's shoulder against their will, that is assault. Because when they hear the word assault, they imagine blood and broken bones and black eyes and all of that stuff. So it seems a little unreal that that constitutes assault. But no, that has to reasonably constitute assault, because we have to be able to establish a legal bulwark to result to. There has to be a legal bulwark that prevents it, allows us to prevent it from ever getting to the point of blood and broken bones and bruises and all of that. And so, yes, putting your hand right there is assault. Using profanity when talking to somebody and bringing up, stop thinking about my twinkle, is aggressive as well, because it implies twinkle refers to penis, so that would be another example of aggressive language. So already this is aggressive behavior. The fact that he's doing it as an internet prank does not mean shit. Calling it an internet prank does not automatically void your responsibility for your actions. You don't get to make things not, you don't get to stop taking responsibility for your actions because you've thought of a new term to refer to them by. But the other thing that constitutes a physical threat to Alan Cooley would have been the fact that this person was continuing to block his path, was following him, refusing to stop following him, and continuing to block his path and standing in his personal space. All of those things constitute a physical threat to your safety. And again, in most people's minds, they imagine that physical threat, that the physical threat is something, has to be something like a person actually physically assaulting you or punching you or something like that it has to get to that point. But no, when you are blocking someone's path after they have asked you to stop, after they've tried to get by you, even if they don't ask you, if they're trying to get past you and you continue to block their path, to say nothing of if they ask you to move, if you are intentionally blocking someone's path, if you are standing in their personal space against their will, if you are, all of those things, all of that, if you're following them against their will, if you are following after them, all of those things make you a physical threat to them, irrespective of whether or not you intend to actually harm them. You are, at that point, you are harming them, irrespective of what your intention is. You are causing them fear, you are causing them to feel fear, you're causing them to feel harassed, and no, they are not a snowflake for feeling that way. One time, I was in a store doing some shopping, and there was a guy who was cruising in there. He was in there cruising, and very obviously cruising. I walked into the store, and as he was standing outside, and as I walked in, he said, "Oh, what have we here?" And he followed me into the store, and I hate that I have to say this, but this is not meant to be homophobic or gay bashing in any way. This is just one person's unacceptable behavior. But he started following me through the store, and he was right about here behind me the whole time, right, to where if I stopped, if I stopped moving, he would walk into me that close. And he's right about here, and he's whispering "come on" phrases in my ear, what do I need to say to you? I don't, and going on, whispering in my ear, trying all of this stuff, hitting on me. As I got to the checkout, I told him to back off, finally told him to back off. And I said, "Don't talk to me." And he said, "I'll talk to you if I want to talk to you. You don't have to listen." And there was a moment's pause, and he stepped right up into my face in my personal business. And I stepped back and told him on no uncertain terms that I was going to physically harm him if he did not stop what he was doing. Made sure he understood that. And he thought that he was the person who was being mistreated in that situation. Now, I got out of the situation fine, totally unharmed, but he thought he was the person being mistreated in that situation. And he literally was surprised that his behavior could be construed as anything that would determine physical or would warrant physical violence. I certainly did not have to give him I certainly did not have to give him the final warning of explicitly expressing the potential for physical harm to him. I didn't even have to do that. When I told him to back off and he stepped up in my personal space, I could have laid into him at that point, but I made sure that he and everybody else in the store knew what was about, what would happen if he didn't back off. People just don't, a lot of people just cannot fathom that there are rules they have to live by. Some people are just horribly ill-informed about what the boundaries of the law are, and I would imagine that's partially true for Tanner. But I would also think that Tanner is probably, and I've been listening, I'm not any kind of psych expert, but I've been listening to people like Todd Grande analyze Tanner Cook and try to give their thoughts on his behavior. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, another thing, you have to also factor in how Tanner Cook looks. What Alan Cooley knows, he doesn't know he's a part of a prank, quote unquote, if you could even call it that. He doesn't know he's a part of a prank. What he knows is that there's a gang of guys following him through the mall, and the leader is putting this weird, creepy message in his face that sounds aggressive. And not only that, that very same leader, you have to think, if you're going to be a funny man, if you're going to be a comic, if you're going to be silly, you have to think about your physical appearance and how you look. If someone that looked like Woody Allen or somebody that looked like Andy Dick or Mel Brooks or something like that came up and played that message for Alan Cooley, it might be a very different situation because none of those people would have posed a significant physical threat to Alan Cooley. But Tanner Cook is 6'5". And not only is he 6'5", he looks like Brian De Palma in Full Metal Jacket. He looks like somebody who could be a bodyguard if he could, dedicate his life to something productive. He looks like somebody that could be a bodyguard. He's that size and appearance of person. He has a very menacing appearance, and you have to take that into consideration. But anyway, what I wanted to get at, though, as people have been analyzing it, here's what I've been thinking about. Tanner Cook has been completely unrepentant in all of this. He has consistently expressed that he views himself as the victim, as the aggrieved party in all of that. And sadly, his parents have been enabling that as well. Which, by the way, I was also reading an article about, I watched two things. I watched the interview with his mother as she was leaving, with Tanner's mother, as she was leaving the courthouse. She spoke to some reporters, and of course she expressed no regret whatsoever about what Tanner has done. She instead talked all about how this was not the outcome they wanted. And while she's giving this speech, and while she's talking to the press, her son, her idiot dumbass son, comes up behind her and does this Beavis and Butthead face for the camera, acting like a complete fucking moron and continuing to behave as if he's incapable of grasping the gravitas of the situation, let alone his own culpability. And then I read another article that interviewed Tanner Cook's father, saying his father saying that his family is being harassed with people calling the residents and sending them emails and messages on the internet and stuff like that. Now, I want to be very clear about something. That behavior is not acceptable. It should not be done. Don't do it. Do not contact the Tanner family. The Cook family. Do not contact Tanner directly. Do not contact any of these people. Do not insert yourself into this situation. I want that firmly understood. But to Tanner Cook's father, what I would say to him is, hey, if you don't like that behavior you're getting, don't get me wrong, you should not be getting that. People should not be treating you that way. That is not okay. But you need to have some real self-reflection about how we got in this, or about how you and your family got in this situation. What you should be doing, both of his parents are talking to the media, talking about the miscarriages of justice and how they don't think their son did anything wrong and stuff like that. What you should be doing, if you really wanted to deal with the negative public backlash you're having. And again, you don't deserve it. It is unfortunate that your son is a professional fuckwit, but you don't deserve to be treated this way. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that since you're having to deal with it, the most mature and thoughtful way would be to release a statement to the public that said something to the effect of, "We are very sorry for Tanner's actions. We are wholly and completely embarrassed and humiliated that our son has become a professional dumbass. We are going to do everything in our power to curtail his behavior in the future so that he can no longer menace society. We apologize profusely for his actions, and we would appreciate being able to address this matter privately as a family." That is how you handle that. You need to know when it's time to fall on your own sword. You need to know when, and I get it. I get it that you don't want to have to get up there and say, "Hey, we were shitty parents and we let our son turn into a piece of shit." I get that. You don't want to have to say that. That's not lost on me. But you need to, it's clear that you've not taken an adequate amount. He's 21, so he's relatively new to adulthood, but so it's pretty clear that you have not handled Tanner correctly. Maybe he was some kind of behavior problem and you've tried to deal with that for years behind the scenes. I know that's often the case, but even so, you need to take stock of the fact that your son is a public menace and address it through that lens. For crying out loud. From what I understand, Tanner comes from an extraordinarily affluent area, or the area that he does these videos in is a very affluent area, and he's probably suffering from affluenza. Has had, Big Daddy bail him out for far too long. Anyway, so all of that said, bringing it back to the point that, what Tanner is doing, his previous pranks have included things like dressing up as a security guard and ordering people to leave buildings, which, again, if the security team you're impersonating is affiliated with the police, you could potentially be liable for impersonating a police officer from that. Things like grabbing items out of people's shopping carts as they're trying to check out and things like that. Things that constitute violent behavior, things that constitute juvenile delinquency or delinquent behavior at the very least. And again, he seems to think that all of this is excused because he's calling it pranks. Okay, I want to talk about something. Tanner reminds me, his personality, his demeanor, his whole attitude reminds me a lot of a bully that I dealt with, someone that I've talked about on this channel. I had a couple of bullies, had a little gang when I was from grades about 8 through 10. I had to deal with these people. And this was a gang of bullies that these two guys would beat up girls for talking to me. Now, a teenage boy challenging another boy to a fight, over who has the right to, congregate or associate with what girl and that kind of thing is already asinine and infantile enough as it is. But going and beating up the girl takes a special degree of vile, dishonorable, disreputable, despicable character, lack of character to do. But these guys would beat up girls for talking to me. And one of them was a guy I've referred to on my channel as Thing 2. And Thing 2 reminds me a lot of Tanner because, the other guy in the situation was more of a Draco Malfoy type person. He was, if I had to, I can't make a diagnosis of anyone, but if I had to guess, he would probably had some kind of narcissistic personality disorder where he was accustomed to getting everything. I called him the Little Prince because he's, accustomed to getting everything he wants at the snap of a finger. And if you don't give it to him, he'd fly into a rage and that kind of thing. Exactly the person you think of when you say, "Do you have any idea who my father is?" But Thing 2 was more his thing. Now, he could be very menacing and threatening in his own right. And his attacks on me and his mistreatment of me included even very loudly and angrily promising to come kill me in front of an entire classroom full of witnesses, and that kind of thing. But more to the point, and he, if you're just joining us, he didn't just threaten to do that. He described in detail the weapon he was going to use, how he was going to do it, and he and that gang followed me throughout the day, reminding me of that my days were numbered. Anyway, so and he, he was. It's a long. I don't want to keep going into that specific incident. He was made to face some retribution that had absolutely no effect whatsoever on his behavior. But anyway, what I wanted to bring up was that what ultimately seemed to finally get some degree of a clamp put down on his extreme antisocial behavior was that I overheard him and another boy plotting to pull this thing where they were going to assault this very specific girl, a very specific young lady who was about 14 at the time. They were going to get her alone, forcibly remove her clothing, and take pictures of her. I reported that, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it seemed at that point that the school really started throwing the book at him. And the thing was, if you had asked him about that, he would have said, because this was his constant defense for all of his horrendous behavior, was that he was just goofing around, he was just trying to have fun, it was all a joke, he was just being silly. The thing was, he seemed to have this kind of sociopathic glint in his eye. It was that thing that you see Anthony Hopkins do really well in Silence of the Lambs, the kind of alligator crocodile eyes, that kind of thing. But he would describe everything he was doing as, just messing around, just having fun. So, for example, he and the Little Prince had a game they would play where they would pin a girl's arm down to a desk and they would take turns punching her on the arm. And if one of them succeeded in making the girl make any vocal noise in response to what happened, what they were doing to her, then whoever elicited the sound got 10 free licks. And there's one girl whose arm they turned black doing that, and she had to go to the hospital, had to go to the emergency room. And that was again. They saw that as fun, as roughhousing, as goofing around, as boys will be boys, that kind of thing. And I was the one who started, because they were coming after me with this stuff, I started taking them to task for it. And as that started mounting, one of the things, their defense of it was that I was the one who was ruining their high school experience. I was ruining their good time, couldn't take a joke, things like that. And again, like that situation I was describing with the forcibly taking pictures of the young lady, they did not view that as kidnapping and sexual assault and the creation of child pornography. They viewed that as silly, as fun, as a way to prank somebody, essentially. And these kind of people exist. These, I am on the autism spectrum, and people will say, well, autistic people have trouble expressing empathy and showing empathy for others. How is that different from sociopaths having difficulty showing empathy? Well, or not having empathy. The difference is this: an autistic person is empathetic, does care about other people, wants to, wills the good of the other, wants other people to wants to do right by other people, essentially. Now, individual personalities vary, but fundamentally, an autistic person does care like any other person, does want to do right by other people like any other person, but they, because of difficulties understanding social cues and social interaction, they may not always express that empathy or realize that it's time to empathize with somebody the way a neurotypical person might do that automatically. So if you explain to an autistic person that this other person is feeling this, that, and the other way, they will understand that when it's explained to them, and they will want to they will then want to have empathy and have the proper feelings for that person. But the difference between that and sociopathy is a sociopath not only does not have empathy for other people, they see empathy as being a weakness, as being less than lower than or that empathy is a behavior of lower people, that they are above the losers and the pathetic, losers that would have empathy for other people and stuff like that. They see it as a weakness. They think it's funny. They think it's pathetic, that kind of thing. And I bring all of this up because I really do think Thing 2 was sociopathic. And one of the things now, granted, most sociopaths that you encounter, you will never know that you're encountering a sociopath, mainly because, one, because they're very good at they become very good at concealing it, and two, because most sociopaths are not, it's not noticeable in general. Sociopathy exists on a spectrum like a lot of other mental health issues. Most sociopaths, I've read the book, The Sociopath Next Door and Psychopath Free are two books that I've read that I highly recommend. I read an article about it one time that described it like, I think it was an article that described it like this. If you're a parent, if you have children, providing food for your children is the number one most important thing in your life. Like feeding your kids, most important thing. You'll go hungry before you allow your children to starve, that kind of thing. That's how most people automatically see the world. A sociopath, rather, might have a child and they'll think, do I feel like feeding my kid today? Sure, why not? And that's about the extent of how much their sociopathy manifests in their actual lives. Most sociopaths you don't really know. Their sociopathy will manifest in poor impulse control or substance abuse issues or things like that, but it does not wildly derivate them from the general population. And I bring that up because, as I've talked about mental health issues and that kind of thing, trying to understand the way people have interacted with me, like with those guys I described, or have interacted with others, like with Tanner Cook and that sort of thing, you have to realize that most mental health issues do not manifest strongly in an outward manner and that sort of thing. And I really do think that there is some help that Tanner Cook desperately needs, because he's going to get himself killed if he keeps this up. He almost already did. He had to have it. I mean, think about this. One of the problems with things like sociopathy, and I'm not saying this is specifically his problem. I'm not a mental health professional. There's all kinds of things that this could be. But one of the problems that we clearly, unquestionably have here with Tanner Cook is an inability to reflect on his own actions. This is a person who got shot and had to have his gallbladder removed, and his response to that was to act like getting shot made him cool, was to act like he's more of a badass now because he got shot. Most people would think, gosh, if I did something that got me shot and I had to have my gallbladder removed, I need to reconsider my course of action. But Tanner's going to keep fucking around and finding out until he can't anymore. And that's a real problem. Like I said, I think Alan Cooley was totally in the right. Personally, I know I can say in that situation, I would not have had a gun in that situation. And I say that because when I was I used to do ride sharing and food delivery and all of that. And when I was doing it, I didn't carry a gun on me. I carried bear mace, like the stuffed dog the bounty hunter uses. And that stuff, if Tanner Cook had just been sprayed with bear mace, that alone would have put him on the ground. Like he would have, the altercation, you can't, some of the weaker like pepper spray stuff that they give you to put in purses, a lot of that stuff people can just walk through. But if you get hit with bear mace, you're probably going to puke and fall over. I mean, that's at the least. So that alone would have ended the situation. That said, I don't begrudge him handling it the way he did. It was not just that he did, people have been defending him by saying, well, he had no way of knowing it was just a prank. My response is no, it was not just a prank. It was an aggressive bully that was willfully and intentionally trying to menace him. And when you do that to people, people have the right to defend themselves. So I don't see any middle ground in how Tanner behaved. Tanner is not a comedian. He is not a comedian. He is a public menace. And if he does not get the help, the only kind-hearted thing I can say to Tanner is that he needs and deserves to get help. And if he can get that help, he might be able to become a functioning, contributing member of society and not just a professional fuckwit. I want to close with one final thought, analyzing Tanner Cook's character. I've talked a lot about the Joker on here, mainly because I'm a Batman Joker fan, but also because I think the Joker is one of the most fascinating villains of all time. And one of the things about the Joker is that he does not remember becoming the Joker. He doesn't remember his life before the Joker, and so that's why, like the Dark Knight, he says, sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes I remember it another. And in Batman the Killing Joke, he says, if I'm going to have a backstory, I prefer it be multiple choice, that kind of thing. What that does is that allows DC Comics, they've done all kinds of Joker origin stories through the years, from the most recent Joker movie up through, including the Killing Joke back in the 80s and the movie of that. And they've done all these Joker origin stories. They can do as many as they want, because the Joker doesn't remember life before the Joker, so it can be anything they want it to be. But one of the ongoing threads throughout all of this, all of it, the thread that unites all of the stories about the Joker in the origin story, is that he's always a comedian that nobody thinks is funny. And his evil is born out of the narcissistic rage he feels at the fact that he thinks he's funny. He's not funny. Him thinking of himself as a funny comedian is actually just a manifestation of his self-righteous entitlement and his bloated, inflated ego and his narcissism and that kind of thing. But he's not funny. And he's always a comedian, a failed comedian that people don't think is funny. And his fundamental to his anger is the fact that people don't find him funny. And the thing is, what does the Joker actually think is funny? Anarchy. Hysteria, wild hysteria, the downfall of society. Some people just want to watch the world burn. That's what the Joker thinks is funny. And that's what Tanner Cook thinks is funny. Wild uncertainty and confusion and panic and fear and anarchy and all of that. That's what Tanner Cook thinks is funny. And I say that because not only is Tanner going back to being a dumbass, Tanner's not just going back to being a dumbass, Tanner's going back to being a villain. And we need to really think about what, how as a society we're going to address these things. This new phenomenon of so-called internet pranksters going around harassing and menacing people is only getting worse. And Tanner is just the most recent outgrowth of this social contagion that is rapidly spreading. So we need to think about, people need to think about how we're going to address this on a grand scale. Businesses need to think about how they're, need to have response plans in place for when internet pranksters show up. People like, or groups like DoorDash, businesses like DoorDash and that kind of thing that employ people like Alan Cooley, all businesses in general need to have an action plan in place if their employees are confronted by internet pranksters. Because again, it should not just be viewed as, and law enforcement needs specific protocols in place and that kind of thing as well, because it shouldn't just be viewed as a public nuisance. It should be viewed as an act of villainy, as an act that what they're doing in and of themselves is an acts of villainy and acts of evil and acts of cruelty, not just stupid behavior. So we need to start reevaluating how we're doing it. A lot of this problem could be addressed if platforms like YouTube and TikTok would just agree not to host videos like this, not to allow people to get these 15 minutes of fame they think they're entitled to. But anyway, like I said, I am someone who, as you know, tries very hard to find a nuanced third position in all of this, a higher ground in terms of my perception that gets out of the standard back and forth. In this case, I'm very much on the side of Alan Cooley, and the best I can say is that This internet prankster thing is just allowing bullies like Tanner Cook to continue their bullying well into adulthood. And so far from being simply bullying simply being something that is a product of youthful exuberance that people are expected to grow out of, now it's becoming monetizable. Now it's becoming a career of evil. And we need to figure out how to address that.